Hi all, welcome to Custom Development or the Power Platform. What to pick for your next Microsoft Teams customization. First, our sponsors. So these great sponsors make this event possible, so check them out please. And this is me. I'm Yannick Reekmans. I'm a partner at Cubix. We're a Belgium-based consultancy firm focusing on Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform. I'm an Office Development MVP where I focus mainly on Microsoft Teams development and SharePoint development. You can find me on Twitter at Yannick Reekmans, it's my Twitter handle, and I blog regularly on blog.yannickreekmans.be. Please follow me. And these are the topics of today. So I'll start with a short introduction. We'll check what Microsoft Teams as a platform will mean. We'll go over what is Dataverse for Teams, and then why you should pick custom development or the Power Platform for your next Microsoft Teams customization. The pros and cons of each choice and whatever may suit your needs best. And then we'll do a quick wrap-up where I give away some stickers. So Microsoft Teams as a platform, what is it? So Teams as a platform means that you can build applications on top of Microsoft Teams. You can integrate them with Teams, or you can use Teams as a service and integrate Teams functionality right inside your own application. Now, for a platform means you bring your own application into Microsoft Teams. And it can be done in 4 different levels, requiring less or more code depending on which level you choose. So first of all, there are the ready-made applications. These are applications that are made available by Microsoft or the partners in the Teams store. They're already available and you probably are using them already today. It's, for example, the Teams, the SharePoint application or the Office application or Stream, but also Kahoot or SurveyMonkey are one of the hundreds of or just some of the hundreds of applications that are available in the Teams store. Now, you go into the Teams store, you find them, you select them, you install them, and you're up and running in a matter of seconds. A second level and requiring a bit more coding are the low-code apps and workflows. So that's basically where you use the Power Platform to streamline processes and unlock critical insights, and you integrate that directly into Microsoft Teams. So you build an application in PowerApps, or you create a flow in Power Automate, you create an agent in Power Virtual Agents or some dashboards in Power BI, and you expose them inside Microsoft Teams. It's also rather easy. Most of them have an easy button to say publish to Teams, and it doesn't require much to get started with these applications or get these applications inside Teams. The third level are the reference solutions, also known as the app templates. And these are open source applications that are made available on GitHub by Microsoft and partners and the community, and they complete a business scenario. So you can use them as is, download them from GitHub, install them in your Teams client. You might need some Azure knowledge to get all of them up and running. Some require some installation in Azure or some resources enabled or an app registration to get everything done. And then you can install them in Teams. So it's either use them as is, try them out, maybe tweak them a little bit because they're open source to fit your business case better, or just use them as an inspiration for your own custom application. And then requiring the most code, of course, are the full code custom solutions. So this is where you as a developer or your team of developers build an application specifically for your needs. Totally customized, totally specific to whatever business case you are ready to solve. But you can also integrate existing applications inside Teams. So you can take your existing website or line of business application with a minor amount of tweaks, you can embed them in Teams as well. So this is Teams as a platform. Now, if you look at all the possibilities with Teams as a platform, you see that Teams requires an interface for you to pick and a backend for your data. So if you want to build an application and expose them into Microsoft Teams, you have to choose an interface. So your application will either be exposed as a tab or a bot, potentially as an adaptive card, by using messaging extensions, task modules, or just notifications, or a combination of any of those. And then in the backend, you have some systems that store the information, store the data, and most commonly used, because we're Microsoft or Microsoft based, is probably Azure combined with Microsoft Graph or some SharePoint lists or documents, using PowerApps and Power Automate to expose the data, or sometimes use connectors and webhooks for incoming and outgoing information. And that's how you build your application. So your application is is a combination of interfaces with a backend. And then you have to choose the place where it will be exposed, the surface where your application will exist. And your application can exist in the team scope. So this is what we're most familiar with. So in the team scope, it's a tab on top of a channel, for example. But the same thing can exist as well in the group, a tab on top of a group or a group chat. Some bots can exist in a team or in a group as well. You can also have applications that exist in a personal scope. So just for you, just for the one end user, this application is available, and all the information exposed in the application is specific for that end user as well. While in a team or a group scope, the information is contextually aware or contextually relevant to all the people that are in the team or in the group. And then last but not least, you can expose your application in a meeting as well. With meetings, it's special because meetings are a rather new extensibility point, and the extensibility point for Teams or three extensibility points, rather. So you can have your application exposed pre-meeting or post-meeting and during the meeting as well, as a side panel or as a pop-up inside a meeting. We'll go deeper into this topic a little bit later into the presentation. So this is Teams as a platform, or a high-level overview of the possibilities with Teams as a platform. So let's see what it means, or what is Microsoft Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. So it started with being named CDS Lite, or Common Data Service Lite. People that are in this ecosystem for a longer time know that there has been a lot of talks about a light version of the Common Data Service exposed somewhere with a lesser licensing price or lower licensing price. So the entry level or the barrier was a little bit lower. And then it got renamed to Microsoft Dataflex. Over the summer of 2020, Microsoft announced that we would get Microsoft Dataflex. And Microsoft Dataflex would be the umbrella name for Common Data Service, standalone, as well as in Teams. But that was kind of confusing, so they decided 3 days later that they would rename the part for Teams to Microsoft Dataflex for Teams. So now we got Microsoft Dataflex and Microsoft Dataflex for Teams. And then something happened with some trademark issues, so they reverted back to Project Oakdale, which was the internal code name of the project of embedding CDS inside Microsoft Teams. So Project Oakdale for a couple of months, and back to Common Data Service for the standalone version. And then finally, they announced the final name, or what's currently known as the final name of CDS Lite, Microsoft Dataflex, Microsoft Dataflex for Teams, and Project Oakdale, which is Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. And Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is a built-in low-code data platform for Microsoft Teams that empowers users to build custom applications, bots, and flows in Teams by using PowerApps, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Automate, which is the definition that just comes from docs.microsoft.com. So Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is a way for users to build applications, whether it's with PowerApps or Power Virtual Agents or Power Automate, directly inside the Teams client. So it's bring everything into Teams. And Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is built on top of Dataverse. And Dataverse is a new name of Common Data Service. So Dataverse is the standalone version, the full-blown, full-featured version of Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. We'll see later in the presentation that Dataverse and Dataverse for Microsoft Teams are similar, but not completely similar or completely equal. they have some limitations, or some limitations are applied on Dataverse for Microsoft Teams, because you do need to have an incentive to upgrade to those nice and shining premium licensing. And Dataverse for Microsoft Teams provides a relational data storage with rich data types, governance, and solution deployment to the Teams App Store. So this means that all of the nice things we get in CDS or in Dataverse, we now get inside Microsoft Teams with an easy way to publish your application in the end into the Teams App Store, so that the rest of your organization or the rest of your team can use that application as well. Now, if you look at PowerApps in Teams, it looks like this. So PowerApps is an application that you install from the Teams App Store, and it gives you all the functionality for Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. So it is kind of confusing that we're talking about Dataverse for Microsoft Teams, and all the information you find for Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is named Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. And then you go into the Teams App Store and you need to go find PowerApps. Now, when you use the PowerApps application in Microsoft Teams, it creates the Dataverse environments in the backend. So Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is the low-level or the lower-level database, the relational data structures, and they're not really exposed into the Teams client. It's the PowerApps application that is used to create your applications inside Microsoft Teams. Same goes for Power Virtual Agents. So Power Virtual Agents follows the same path, the same approach. It also creates the Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment, and you can build your chatbot in minutes. Now, what is Dataverse for Teams, practically? Well, if you create a Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment, or you can have a Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment, one for each team in Microsoft Teams. So as soon as you create your first application associated with a Microsoft Teams team, it will also create a Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment in the backend. And you can see that if you go into the Power Platform Admin Center, we used to have production environments and trial environments and sandbox environments in there already. If you're familiar with the Dynamics environments approach, or the Common Data Service, or the Dataverse environments approach. But there's now a new type of environment visible in there. So as soon as you create an application, either a Power App or a Power Virtual Agent for a specific team, it will create this environment, and you can see that environment in the Power Platform Admin Center, and it will be named Microsoft Teams as a type. And the Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment contains all the data, all the applications, all the flows, and all the bots associated with a specific team. And the only way, or the only accessible method for these data, apps, flows, and bots is through Microsoft Teams. So everything that you create in the Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment can only be used inside the Teams client. It can be used in the desktop client, in the web client, and in the mobile client, but it can never be used standalone. Whereas a PowerApps app that's built on top of Dataverse, used to be known Common Data Service, can be used standalone on your mobile client, standalone in your browser. All of the applications that you create with Dataverse for Microsoft Teams are limited to being exposed inside a Microsoft Teams client. So it's a limitation, but it's also, there are some advantages as well. And the good to knows for Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is that it's currently generally available. It took some time, but there are some, on the other hand, quite a lot of limitations that you need to be aware of. So a Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environment is limited to 2 gigabytes of storage per environment. So one environment can contain 2 gigabytes of data, but it can also contain a maximum of 1 million rows in your tables. Additionally, you can have a maximum of 500 environments, Microsoft Dataverse for Microsoft Teams environments, inside your tenant. There is an asterisk there because It's not 500 environments for everyone. It's calculated that you get 5 environments by default, plus 1 extra environment for each 20 Office seats that you buy. So for 20 Office 365 E3 licenses, you get 1 additional Dataverse environment. So to get up to your 500 environments, you need quite a lot of Office 365 licenses as well. Good to know is that the App Studio in Dataverse for Teams is a little bit different than the App Studio for standalone PowerApps applications. And this mainly comes down to the fact that in a standalone App Studio, you get the standard controls with the standard or the normal properties, like it's been for the last couple of years with PowerApps. Now with the App Studio and Dataverse for Teams embedded into the Teams client, it will by default use the Fluent UI controls and for your look and feel. Now those Fluent UI controls have different properties, different options, different configuration possibilities, as opposed to the normal controls or the default controls that we're used to in the normal App Studio. There is an idea that these will converge in the end at some point, but there's nothing known at the moment. There's no possibility to access your environment as a pro developer or with an API. So there's no API access to a common data service or a Dataverse for Teams, a Dataverse for Teams environment. So there's no API access, which there is if you go standalone or with Dynamics. And there's no pro dev experience. So you can't really create any or get a professional developer to create extra options in your Dataverse for Teams applications, because it doesn't support custom controls, it doesn't support custom connectors, and in terms of premium connectors, they aren't supported either. So in a Dataverse for Teams environment, you cannot use premium connectors unless you have the licensing or the premium licenses for standalone PowerApps. But then why would you build your application in Dataverse for Teams and be limited to the Teams client, while you can build them standalone with premium connectors and embed them afterwards into Teams? So for a Dataverse for Teams environment, there are no premium connectors, except for one, which is Azure API management. So if you create an API and you put them in Azure API management, you can publish that API from there in Azure API management as a connector inside your Dataverse for Teams applications. So it can be used in there. While Azure API management is a premium connector for standalone Dataverse applications or PowerApps applications, it's not premium inside Dataverse for Teams. So you get it for free there. Last but not least, there is the promise that if you start with a Dataverse for Teams environment, that you can promote it in the end, or whenever you want, to a full-blown Dataverse environment and even to a Dynamics 365 environment. Now, these promises have been made for, I think, years now, but haven't still haven't been fulfilled. So at the moment, if you start with a Dataverse for Teams environment, you're stuck with the Dataverse for Teams environment. You cannot promote it yet to a full-blown Dataverse or further on to a Dynamics 365 environment. I hope this will come soon, because it's not very user-friendly to be stuck with one type of environment and no ability to upgrade it to a larger functionality or upgrade it easily to larger functionality, but it's been promised that it should be possible somewhere in the future. So now that you know some of the intricacies of Dataverse for Teams versus Dataverse, let's see how everything stacks up. Custom development versus Dataverse for Microsoft Teams versus standalone Power Platform. And first of all, let's check the Teams context. So when you build an application that's going to be embedded inside Microsoft Teams, you probably want to work with the context of Teams. You want to embed your application and know in which team it's been embedded or in which channel it's been embedded, who is the logged in user, maybe even what theming is being used, whether it's a light theme or the dark theme, and you want to adjust your Power App as well to switch colors to fit better inside the current look and feel of the Teams client. So then you work with the Teams context. When you do that for custom development, specifically when you create a Microsoft Teams tab, you will be using the Teams JavaScript SDK for tabs. And it has about 40 properties available that you can use on this context object so that you can use them and build contextually aware applications. Now, if you create an application with Dataverse for Teams, you get a Teams integration object. That Teams integration object shows up in your Dataverse for Teams PowerApps automatically. And it has about 5 properties available with some sub-properties as well, but you see already that the information is a lot more limited on this integration object. Now if you go standalone PowerApp and you embed it into Teams, you get some context properties as well, but they're limited to about 11 properties available, and they get passed through by the query string. So let's see how that works. So let's switch to my browser. And if you go embed your application or your PowerApps application into Microsoft Teams, you get context from Teams by using the parameter function. So if you publish your application to Teams and you embed it in Teams, by default, it will add these 11 variables to the query string. So all these properties get added to the query string with their specific value, and when you use the parameter function, you can fetch, for example, the chat ID or the channel type from the query string. So this is when you embed your application in, or your standalone PowerApps application inside Teams. Now if you go full-blown custom development and you create your own Teams tab, you can use the JavaScript SDK, and you can see here immediately more than 40 of these properties are available. Things like theme type, theming, tenant ID, user principal name, the SharePoint context when it's hosted in SharePoint, a meeting ID when your tab is running in a meeting context. So all that information is available on the JavaScript SDK, and it's not available on the query string object or the query string parameters when you embed your standalone PowerApps application inside the Teams client. Now, if you go into PowerApps itself and you create a Dataverse for Teams PowerApps, we'll do that. So it's quite easy. You either do create an app or you do new app. Buttons do the same thing. So let's do a new app. First thing you have to do is select a theme where you have to add your application to. So remember, a Power App or a virtual agent that you create in a Dataverse for Teams environment is linked one-on-one with a specific theme in Microsoft Teams. So you have to pick a theme. Let's pick this one. And the first time that you create an application for that theme, it will also have to create the Dataverse for Teams environment in the backend. So it will take a bit of time. Now for this theme sensitivity label test, I already created the environment. So now it will start creating the PowerApps application, getting things ready, and it will pop up with the question to name my application. So I hope that this goes rather quickly, otherwise I have to fill a silence. So it's getting things ready, and you have to name your application. So let's do Scottish Summit Demo, fix the typo, of course, and save the application. So now we have an application specifically for the sensitivity labels theme that's named Scottish Summit Demo. When it's saved, we can start working with it. Still saving. So it's not the quickest experience, but we're used to that already from the App Studio on make.powerapps.com. It's very similar. It's a very similar experience. So if you go into the tree view of all of your screens and components, you can find the themes object. So you see here, it's a data source. It's added automatically inside your themes or inside your PowerApps application for Dataverse for Teams. It's not available if you're going standalone. So it's added automatically, and this is the themes context object or the themes integration object that's available. You cannot figure out which properties are available except for clicking somewhere in here. Oh, change this and go themes. That's the only way it's possible. And then you do dot, and it will show you all of the options that are available. Like I said, it has about 5 properties available, which is the context, entity ID, whether or not your application is running in full screen, is running in the side panel, the theme, light or dark theme, or potentially the high contrast version, in which channel it's running, in which meeting it's running, in which theme it is running. So if you do, for example, this theme, you get some additional options like the display name for the theme, the group ID, and the theme ID of the theme in which it's running. Same goes for channel. So you get the display name, the ID, and the kind of channel in which it's running, whether it's a standard channel or a private channel. And this is the context object that you've got available. You can use this context object with all of the information that's exposed to access, for example, Microsoft Graph to get additional information. But then you run into a problem again, because accessing Microsoft Graph is a premium action. It requires the HTTP connector, which is not available inside Dataverse for Teams. You can work around that by creating an API that's embedded in Azure API Management, which you then expose in or publish with the Azure API Management connector inside your Dataverse for Teams PowerApps. But that's a whole lot of work just to get additional information about your team or context information about your team inside your PowerApps application. Now, the other thing that's specific to a Dataverse for Teams PowerApps application is the fact that you can access the like the common data service or Dataverse. So if you don't have premium licensing in your PowerApps or standalone PowerApps applications, you cannot access this data panel. But with Dataverse for Teams, you get an integrated experience with the underlying Dataverse. So you can create your own new table, for example, people. You can create a table. It will create a table inside Dataverse, and it will start with a name. You can add additional column like email, address. You can pick a type, being email, and you can create it. You can add another column being website of type URL and create it as well. And then you can fill some data. So you can say and fill in the website. So this is, and then your data is saved inside the Dataverse table that's underlying your environment. So this is a specific UI that's laid on top of Dataverse. So if you're familiar with standalone PowerApps, you also get a Dataverse interaction experience on make.powerapps.com. With Dataverse for Microsoft Teams, you get this interface directly embedded inside the Teams client application and inside the PowerApps application inside Teams. So my data is saved. I can close it. And you can see that my data source is now available inside the Teams client or inside your PowerApps inside Teams client. So you can now use this data source to build your application. Remember that all of the data that's stored inside Dataverse or Microsoft Teams. For each environment, it's limited to 2 gigabytes of data and 1 million items or 1 million rows. So if you need to store more than 1 million people, for example, you will need to upgrade to standalone PowerApps licensing. So let's switch back to the presentation. Now, if you want to build an application, you have to choose where you want to expose that application. And depending on which platform you choose or which extensibility point you pick, you get some options. So first of all, let's see how we can extend conversations. Now, if you want to extend conversations, you can do that with a conversational bot. So a conversational bot is just a bot that provides question-answer type of interaction. So you ask it a question, it provides a response on which you can interact again. Now, a conversational bot can be built with custom development, with Dataverse for Teams, or with Power Virtual Agents. But depending on where you want to expose your conversational bot, it's only possible with custom development and Power Virtual Agents. Because remember, a Dataverse for Teams application is one-on-one linked to a specific Teams team. So that means that if you want to create a Power Virtual Agent in Dataverse for Teams, it cannot be exposed in the personal chat or in the group chat. You can only expose the Power Virtual Agent inside that specific team in which it has been created in. If you switch to action-based message extensions, which are message extensions that are triggered from a composed message area, from a command box, or on messages, they can only be created by custom development. You cannot create those with Dataverse for Teams. So you cannot create a pop-up item or an interactive experience that's triggered from the composed message area or the command box by creating a Power App on Dataverse for Teams, for example. You can also not create that with a standalone Power App either. Now, with Power Automate, you can in some way create some interaction. So you can trigger an action-based message extension with Power Automate on a message. You can use for a selected message. So if you create a flow in Power Automate and it uses the trigger for a selected message, it will show up on messages inside Teams. So you click on the 3 dots, it will drop down a menu, and in that menu it will show that flow that you just created. If we're looking at search-based messaging extensions, they are available underneath the compose message area or in the command box. And these are used to search an external system. On the screenshot, for example, we're searching YouTube. So directly from your Teams client, while creating a message or in the command box on top of your Microsoft Teams client, you can search YouTube for a specific video and then embed it into the message that you're composing. Now, these search-based messaging extensions are only supported by custom development. You cannot use Dataverse for Teams applications or a standalone Power Platform to create this type of extension. On to extending canvases. Canvases are like the full page experience you get when creating channel tabs. And creating a channel tab is supported by custom development, so you can create a Microsoft Teams tab from scratch, which is an iframe that shows your web application inside the Teams client with some Teams aware context applied to it. But you can also use Dataverse for Teams, so you can create a Power App or a Power Virtual, well, mainly a Power App on a Dataverse for Teams environment and then embed it directly inside a specific team. In Teams, or you can also create standalone Power Apps and embed them as well as a channel tab inside a team. For personal apps, it's a little bit different. So a personal app is built on top of the same functionality or the same framework as a Teams tab or channel tab is built on. But a personal app is not linked to a specific team, and therefore you cannot use PowerApps application that's built in a Dataverse for Teams environment as a personal application, because a Dataverse for Teams PowerApps is linked one-on-one to a specific team, And in the personal scope, you don't have a team, so it's logical that you cannot embed or expose that Power App as a personal app inside Teams. So for that use case, you need to either go for custom development or create a standalone PowerApps application with your default included licensing or premium licensing to expose it as a personal app in Teams. And then there's the ability to extend meetings. So extending meetings can be done in the pre and post meeting tab. So when you create an invitation in the Teams calendar and you open that invitation afterwards, you can add an application already as a tab in that invitation. And after the meeting, it's there as well. So pre and post meeting, it's a tab built on top of the same features and the same tab framework for channel tabs or personal apps, but now inside the calendar, inside an invitation. You can also create an application in meeting. So it's also a tab, but it shows on a side panel while being in a meeting. And you can create in-meeting notifications. So when you're extending meetings, you can do that by custom development. So that's supported already. We know that you can create a standalone PowerApps application, and with some tweaks, you can also expose it as a pre-post meeting tab or as a side panel inside or in meeting experience. But it's not officially supported. But you can do it. It's just some properties you have to change in the app manifest, and then it will show up as well. Now with Dataverse for Teams, it's a different story. Because all of this extensibility is built on top of the Teams tab, we can assume that you can probably create a Dataverse for Teams application as well that's supported in pre and post meeting tab or in meeting tab. And you saw already while I was doing the demo that it has this meeting contextual object. So there is work that's being done, but it's currently unclear how it would work because a Dataverse for Teams application, like I repeated many times before, is associated with a specific team. And a meeting is not necessarily associated with a specific team. So it's unclear whether a Dataverse for Teams PowerApps application will only be available for channel meetings inside a specific team, or potentially with some black magic will also be available to standalone meetings that are created directly from a Teams channel, from the Teams calendar or your Outlook calendar. This information is not known yet, but it's an evolving product, so we'll see that information probably very, very soon. And last but not least, what about licensing? So custom development is included in your Teams license. So if you have Microsoft Teams included in your Office 365 license or whatever license you've got that includes Microsoft Teams, you can also do custom development. Now, of course, some Azure costs might occur, or AWS, or wherever you host your application. Because with custom development, you have to build your application and you have to publicly expose it somewhere so that the Teams client can find it and show it inside the Teams client. So while it's included in your licensing, there might be additional costs involved. Dataverse for Teams is part of most Microsoft Teams licenses. So if you've got one of the enterprise or premium licensing, you probably also have Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. It can be turned off by your administrator. So potentially your administrator has disabled the creation of Dataverse for Teams environments, and thus you cannot create PowerApps inside Teams. But it's included in licensing, so ask your administrator if you cannot find the PowerApps application or the fact that the PowerApps application potentially limits you from creating data storage. And for standalone or embedded PowerApps, I don't really like to touch upon that licensing. It's rather complex, it's rather difficult, but there is a good Twitter thread available by Jukka Niranen. So you can scroll through this and it helps you understand why you need or when you need standalone licensing, why it's a good idea to have standalone licensing, but for me, it's a bit too complicated, so I'm not touching upon it. Now, besides capabilities, there are other things to consider, of course. So you have to consider the skills of your team. If your team is well versed in custom development, but not necessarily in PowerApps or Power Automate, you probably are faster by letting them build applications from scratch. Of course, timing, budget, and scope are the classical things to consider. If you have a tight budget, potentially Power or Dataverse for Microsoft Teams is a good alternative to custom development. It's probably quicker to get things done. It's probably easier to get things done. And it's included in most licensing, so you don't have the additional costs. Same goes for scope. If your scope is not too broad, not too expanded, you don't need to interact with external systems that that don't require premium licensing, for example, or premium connectors. Dataverse for Teams is a good approach. Same goes for timing. If you need to do it now, Dataverse for Teams is generally available. You can directly start. You don't necessarily need a developer, so you can just start your development. And on the other end, there's also the app audience and the app owner. So you have to consider who will be using your application. If they are, or your audience is used to using PowerApps applications, it might make sense to build your own new application as well in PowerApps. If you want to hand over that application after development to a separate owner or a new owner, it makes sense to do it into Dataverse for Teams when that application owner has experience with Teams and Dataverse already, so it's for them a lot easier to maintain that application. Same goes for data location. So if you want all your data stored in Dataverse, it's a good idea to pick Dataverse for Teams, but you cannot have any API access to that data, so you have to be aware of that as well. And reusability is a big thing as well, because if you create an application in Dataverse for Teams, it can only be used inside the team in which it's associated. So you cannot reuse that one application for another team or another environment. It's limited to that specific team. So that means you either have to export and import it into the other Dataverse for Teams environment, or you have to upgrade your environment to a full-blown Dataverse environment, which is currently not supported yet, or you have to expose that application, which is a new feature, to a specific, or to the whole of your organization. So it's either just the specific team or the whole organization. There's nothing in between, which might not be the best option either. So those are a lot of things to consider besides the capabilities that we discussed before. So this means we come to the when to use what slide. This is what everybody asks in the end. So now, when do I need to use what functionality? And as a good consultant, I always say it depends. So I hope that with this presentation, you got to know all of the pros and cons of custom development, Dataverse for Teams, Dataverse standalone, and that you can make a good decision depending on your use case, depending on your requirements on when to use what option for your next Teams customization project. So thank you for attending. I'll leave you with some resources to get started, to read up on all of the information that I presented during this session. And if you've got any questions, I'm normally attending this live as well, so you can reach out in the chat with your questions. Afterwards, if you're watching a recording, feel free to reach out on Twitter or on my blog. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just Google me and you'll find me. Send me an email, shoot me a message, and I will try to help you out with any questions you've got about this presentation or anything else regarding Microsoft 365 or the Power Platform. And I'm also doing a sticker giveaway. So I'm giving away some stickers from Pimp Your Own Device. I'm giving away a licensing Kildor user adoption and I hate stickers. You can see them on the screen. And there normally is enough credit left for you to pick your own 2 stickers as well, and then they will be sent to your home by Pimp Your Own Device. So go to the link, fill in the form. I will pick 2 winners out of all the submissions, and they can get a voucher, or they will get a voucher from me to order their own stickers. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of the summit, and hopefully see you next time.